Welcome to our deep dive on borderline personality disorder, or BPD for short. We've got a really interesting set of sources this time around.
Yeah, looks like someone wants to get a clearer picture of what it's actually like to live with BPD.
Right.
Go beyond just the label.
Absolutely. One of the sources that really jumped out at me was this website, Stokit.new.
Stokit.new.
Yeah, I know, right? Love the name.
Yeah, that's a great name.
But it's more than just an information source. They're really trying to tackle the stigma head on.
Which is so important. BPD is a diagnosis that carries so much baggage.
So much.
Mm.
And what's interesting is that Stokit.new is AI-driven, which could lead to some quirks. But hey, that's part of the fun of these deep dives, right?
Exactly. We never know what we're going to find.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is BPD, and how would you define it?
Well, at its core, it's a personality disorder characterized by, really intense emotions, relationships that feel unstable, a shifting sense of self, and impulsive behaviors. But it's much more nuanced than a simple definition can capture.
That's where the misunderstood part comes in, right?
Yeah.
One of the first things our sources point to is the negative stereotypes that surround BPD.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really unfortunate. People with BPD are often stereotyped as being manipulative or attention-seeking.
Which is so unfair and inaccurate.
It is. Not only is it inaccurate, but it's also incredibly damaging. These stereotypes prevent people from getting the help they need.
It's like seeing someone struggling to keep their head above water and assuming they're doing it for attention, not realizing there's a powerful current pulling them under.
Perfect analogy. Those behaviors are often a way of coping with immense emotional pain, especially that fear of abandonment, which is so central to BPD.
Right. And speaking of misunderstandings, our sources also talk about misdiagnosis. BPD can be confused with things like bipolar disorder or depression.
Yeah, and BPD is complex. It's multifaceted. Even professionals sometimes miss the mark. So you have people who are struggling, but they're not getting the right help because the very nature of DPD makes it hard to recognize.
It's a tricky situation. And even when an I is diagnosed correctly, there's this tendency to, misinterpret the emotional intensity. People might say someone with BPD is just being dramatic, but it's so much deeper than that, right?
Yeah, it's not about being dramatic. It's like being on an emotional roller coaster, going from extreme highs to extreme lows. And those shifts can happen really rapidly. Imagine feeling intense joy one minute and then plunging into despair the next, seemingly out of nowhere.
I can only imagine how disorienting that would be.
It's incredibly challenging to deal with. And for a lot of people, it's rooted in how their brain functions.
So there's an actual neurological component to it.
Yes. Research is suggesting that the way emotions are regulated in the brain is different for folks with BPD.
So it's not just a matter of feeling things more strongly.
Right. It goes much deeper than that.
And that makes me think about something else our sources touched on, the cultural and medical gaps surrounding BPD. If even some healthcare professionals are lacking in their understanding, how can we expect the general public to know better?
It's a real problem. And that lack of education just contributes to the stigma, which then prevents people from getting help, which then leads to inadequate treatment. It's a vicious cycle.
It is. And then you throw in the media's influence. Think about how BPD is often portrayed in movies and TV shows.
Right. Often very stereotypical and often negative.
Exactly. And all that does is reinforce those harmful myths that we've been talking about.
It makes it that much harder for people to understand the reality of BPD and for those who have BPD to feel safe seeking help.
Okay, so we've established that BPD is often misunderstood.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be really helpful to kind of break down those symptoms we've been talking about.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Like, how do they actually play out in someone's daily life? What are some of the key things we should know about the symptoms of BPD?
Well, we've talked about the intense moods, and how rapidly they can change. That makes it really difficult to maintain any kind of stability, whether it's in relationships or at work, or even just getting through the day-to-day.
It's like that emotional roller coaster we were talking about. I can't imagine trying to make even simple decisions when you're feeling like that.
Exactly. And then you factor in the fear of abandonment, which is so prevalent in BPD. For someone with BPD, the fear of being rejected or left behind can be all-consuming.
To the point where it actually dictates their actions.
Yeah. And often those actions end up pushing people away, which, is the exact opposite of what they want.
It's heartbreaking. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're so afraid of being abandoned that they act in ways that might actually cause it to happen.
Exactly. And then, of course, that ties directly into another major symptom, unstable relationships.
Right. And it makes sense. If you're constantly afraid of being abandoned, it's going to be really hard to maintain healthy, stable relationships.
The sources describe this pattern of, idealizing someone at first, seeing them as perfect, but then very quickly switching to devaluing them, like seeing them as flawed or untrustworthy. It's a really painful cycle for everyone involved.
I imagine the unstable sense of self that's common with BPD plays into that as well. If you don't have a solid sense of who you are, it's going to be that much harder to connect with others in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. You're right on the mark that unstable self-image is a core feature of BPD. It can make it difficult to make decisions, It
Yeah.
can lead to a lack of clear goals. And often there's this persistent feeling of emptiness. Like you said, if you don't have a solid foundation, how can you build anything lasting?
Right. And then there's the impulsivity, which can manifest in so many ways, right? From substance abuse to reckless spending to self-harm and even suicidal thoughts. What's driving those behaviors?
It's often about trying to cope with the intense emotional pain. It's a desperate attempt to escape those overwhelming feelings, even if it means doing things that have really negative consequences. That image we talked about earlier about feeling like you're drowning in your own emotions.
Yeah.
Well, for some people, these impulsive behaviors are like a way to come up for air, to just, break free from the intensity, even for a moment.
It's a powerful image. It makes me realize that these symptoms aren't intentional. They're not about being manipulative. It's a real disorder that impacts every part of a person's life.
Exactly. And that's the key takeaway here. Understanding those underlying causes, understanding the immense suffering that often accompanies BPD, we need to move beyond judgment and foster a much deeper understanding of what this experience is truly like.
We were talking about that feeling of like drowning in your own emotions. It's a really striking image.
It is, isn't it? And it really gets to the heart of what we mean when we talk about the intensity of BPD. It's not just feeling things strongly, it's much more than that. For someone with BPD, emotions can be so overwhelming. Like, they can completely hijack your thoughts, your actions. It's hard to think clearly, to make rational decisions.
Can you give me an example? Like, what would that look like in a real-life situation?
Okay, sure. Imagine you're at the grocery store, right? And someone accidentally bumps into you with their cart.
Happens all the time.
Right. For most people, it's a minor annoyance. You might be a little startled, maybe a little frustrated, but you move on. But for someone with BPD, that same bump, that little bump, could trigger a whole cascade of intense emotions, way out of proportion to what actually happened.
Because their emotional thermostat is just set differently.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of just feeling a little annoyed, they might feel intense anger, shame, a fear of being judged. And those feelings can be so overwhelming that it's hard to control how you react.
So then people see the reaction and they think, oh, they're overreacting. But what they're not seeing is what's going on underneath.
Right. It's not about being dramatic or trying to get attention. It's about having this different wiring in your brain, this sensitivity that makes even little things feel huge.
And that leads us to how this impacts relationships, which is something our sources spend a lot of time on. If everyday situations can feel so intense, I can only imagine what it's like to navigate something as complex as a romantic relationship, or even friendships, family relationships.
Oh, it's definitely a challenge. Even small disagreements, things that most couples would brush off, can feel catastrophic to someone with BPD.
Like the whole relationship is ending.
Yeah, like it's the end of the world.
That must be exhausting, not only for the person with BPD, but for their partner as well. It's like you're always walking on eggshells, never knowing what might trigger an intense reaction. So let's shift gears a bit. What can someone do to support a loved one with BPD, especially in those moments?
Well, one of the most important things, and our sources really emphasize this, is validation.
Validation. Okay.
It's about acknowledging the reality of their experience, even if you don't fully understand it, even if you wouldn't react the same way. You're not saying you agree with them or that their behavior is okay. You're just saying, I see you, I see that you're hurting, and your feelings are valid.
So even if you think they're overreacting, you don't dismiss their feelings. You meet them where they are.
Right. It's about communicating that you care and that you're willing to listen without judgment, without trying to fix them or tell them how they should feel.
Are there specific phrases that are helpful? I mean, it can be hard to know what to say in those moments when someone is really struggling.
Sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful, like, I hear you, or that sounds really frustrating. Just acknowledging their emotional state without minimizing it.
Okay, so validation is key. Our sources also talk about creating a safe space. What does that look like in practice?
It's about fostering an environment where the person with BPD feels comfortable expressing themselves without feeling judged or criticized. They need to know that they can be vulnerable with you and that you're going to listen.
That takes a lot of patience.
It does. It really does. These emotional storms can be pretty intense. Supporting someone with BPD requires a lot of patience and understanding. It's about being present with them, even when it's hard, and meeting their struggles with compassion, not frustration.
So you're not trying to fix them or make the BPD go away. You're just being there for them.
Exactly. Offering a steady presence in the midst of all the chaos. But it's important to remember that you need to take care of yourself too. That's where boundaries come in.
Boundaries. I can see how that might feel a little counterintuitive when you're trying to be supportive.
Yeah, I know. It might seem that way. But having healthy boundaries is essential for both people in any relationship, especially when one person has BPD. Without boundaries, you risk getting swept up in their emotional chaos and neglecting your own needs.
It's like the instructions they give you on an airplane. Put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. You can't support someone effectively if you're drowning yourself.
That's a perfect analogy. Setting boundaries isn't about being unkind, it's about self-preservation.
So how do you set boundaries in a way that's, firm but also compassionate?
Well, you have to be clear about your limits, but you can still do it in a loving way. For example, you could say, I love you and I want to be there for you, but I can't engage in conversations that involve yelling or name-calling, something like that.
So you're acknowledging their feelings, but you're also drawing a line.
Right. And it's important to remember that setting boundaries is an ongoing process. You might need to reiterate them over and over again, especially at the beginning.
So it sounds like supporting someone with BPD is this delicate balancing act. Validating their feelings, creating a safe space, but also setting healthy boundaries. And, all while taking care of yourself.
You got it. You've summed it up perfectly. It's definitely a challenge. But while those supportive actions are crucial, it's important to remember that you're not a therapist. You can't fix them or make their BPD go away. Professional help is essential, both for the individual with BPD and for their loved ones.
Right. Our role is to support, but we can't be their only source of help.
So are there specific types of therapy that are particularly effective for BPD?
There are. Our sources talk about something called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. It's often considered like the gold standard for treating BPD. It teaches people very practical skills for managing their emotions and building healthier relationships.
DBT. Okay, I have to admit, that sounds a little intimidating.
Oh, it's not as complicated as it sounds.
It does. What does DBT actually involve? Like, what would I be doing if I went to DBT?
So think of DBT like a toolkit. A toolkit that's specifically designed to help people with BPD learn to regulate their emotions, cope with distress, improve their relationships. So it's giving them actual strategies to navigate those really intense emotional experiences we've been talking about.
Exactly. And it focuses on 4 key skill areas: mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and emotion regulation. It's a pretty comprehensive approach. It usually involves individual therapy, but also group skills training. And some people even have phone coaching in between sessions. So, you can get support whenever you need it.
Wow, that's pretty involved. Can you break down those 4 skills for me? What would someone actually be learning in each of those areas?
Sure. Yeah. So mindfulness. Mindfulness is about learning to, pay attention to your thoughts or feelings in the present moment without judgment. It's like becoming an observer of your own internal experience. You're not trying to change anything. You're just noticing what's there.
So instead of getting swept away by those emotional storms, you're learning to observe them from a safe distance.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then there's distress tolerance. That's all about learning how to cope with difficult emotions in healthy ways. So finding ways to ride out those storms, whether it's through relaxation techniques or distraction or reaching out for support.
So giving them alternatives to those impulsive behaviors, which, as we talked about, often have negative consequences.
Yeah, exactly. DBT is about giving people a wider range of options. And then interpersonal effectiveness, that one's all about, building communication skills and relationship skills. So learning how to assert your needs, set boundaries, navigate conflict in a way that preserves the relationship.
Essential life skills for everyone, really, but I imagine especially crucial for folks with BPD. given, the challenges with relationships that we've talked about.
Absolutely. And then finally, there's emotion regulation. And this is all about learning how to, identify your emotions, understand them, and ultimately manage them more effectively. Like learning to turn down the volume on those really intense feelings.
So gaining more control instead of feeling like your emotions are controlling you.
Exactly. So, yeah, as you can see, DBT really does give people a whole set of tools to work with.
It sounds pretty comprehensive. Is there research to back it up? Does it actually work?
It does. It's been really well researched. And studies have shown that DBT can be very effective in reducing self-harming behaviors, improving relationships, and really boosting the overall quality of life for people with BPD.
That's good to hear. But I know DBT is not the only treatment option, right? What else is out there?
Right. So there are a couple of other therapies that have shown a lot of promise for treating BPD. One is called mentalization-based therapy, or MBT for short, and another is schema-focused therapy, or SFT.
Okay, what are the main differences between those therapies and DBT?
So MBT, that one focuses on helping people understand their own mental states as well as the mental states of others. It's about, being able to see things from different perspectives, to develop empathy, which is so important for having healthy relationships.
So stepping outside of your own experience and trying to see the world through someone else's eyes.
Exactly. And then SFT, that focuses on identifying and changing those really ingrained negative patterns of thinking and behaving that we often develop in childhood. These are called schemas, and they can really drive the symptoms of BPD.
So you're working to rewire those old thought patterns that might be contributing to the emotional instability and the relationship challenges.
Exactly. It's about identifying those harmful schemas and then working to replace them with more adaptive, more realistic beliefs. And then, of course, in addition to therapy, medication can sometimes be helpful, to manage specific symptoms like anxiety or depression or impulsivity.
It sounds like finding the right combination of treatments is really key.
It is. It's important to work with a qualified mental health professional, someone who really understands BPD and can tailor a treatment plan to the person's individual needs and goals.
And I imagine having a supportive network of friends and family is important as well.
Absolutely. Support from loved ones, friends, support groups. It can make a world of difference. It's about surrounding yourself with people who understand, who validate you, and who encourage you.
It's a reminder that, no matter how challenging things might feel, you're not alone in this.
You're not alone. And it's important to remember that recovery is a journey. It's not, a destination you reach overnight. There will be ups and downs, good days and bad days. But with persistence, with support, and with the right treatment, people with BPD can absolutely create a life that's full of meaning, full of connection, full of hope.
Well, this deep dive has been really eye-opening for me. I feel like we've gone from feeling, maybe a little overwhelmed by the diagnosis to actually feeling quite hopeful about the possibilities for recovery.
And that's what it's all about, right? Knowledge, understanding, that's what helps us move past fear, past stigma, and embrace compassion.
If anyone listening is struggling with BPD or knows someone who is, please remember that there is hope. There are resources, treatments that work, and a whole community of people ready to support you.
Don't give up. Reach out, connect, and keep believing in the possibility of healing. Your journey matters, and you are not alone.
Beautifully said. And on that note of hope and empowerment, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of borderline personality disorder. We hope you've learned something new and that maybe this sparks some further exploration for you. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and remember, those aha moments are out there waiting to be discovered.